In my grade 9 English class, we were taught about 3 different types of irony. Verbal irony is when somebody says something, but they really mean something else. For example, sarcasm is a very traditional form of verbal irony in most cases. We also learned about dramatic irony, where we, as the observer of a story, movie, play, whatever, know what's happening with the characters and know more about the situation than the characters in the situation itself. And then we have situational irony. A situation where something happens that is a complete opposite of what you expected to happen. And my oh my, this is a very situationally ironic situation we have here. Let's talk about John Tavares, the New York Islanders, the Toronto Maple Leafs, and just get some thoughts out there, because I was sitting here thinking in my chair, I was thinking about the playoffs and how the second round is going to come underway. And I was thinking to myself, what interesting topics are there that exist in the realm of hockey that we can make a commentary on? And this one came to my mind right away because I thought about the only other play-in series qualifying team to make it to the second round, aside from the Vancouver Canucks, that was the New York Islanders. And the Islanders were a team that was in a weird spot around this time 2 years ago. Because around this time 2 years ago, the New York Islanders fan base was all kinda pissed off at one person. And that guy's name was John Tavares. If you don't know the context, which you probably should because this was a very big story, but if you don't, here's the quick rundown. John Tavares was an NHL star. John Tavares was drafted first overall by the Islanders in 2009. John Tavares played 8 seasons with the New York Islanders. John Tavares was a free agent at the end of the 2018 season. And John Tavares did not re-sign with the Islanders. Instead, he became a UFA, and he signed with his hometown Toronto Maple Leafs. And this, at the time, was an extremely huge deal, the biggest story in all of hockey once it went down, because NHL stars don't normally leave the teams that drafted them and go home. It's not really as common in the NHL as it is in, let's say, the NBA, where Kawhi left Toronto to go back to LA and play where he was from. It doesn't normally happen in hockey, which is why when it did happen, this was an absolutely huge story. And Islanders fans were pissed the F off, because this guy was supposed to be the person who helps lead them to the next generation of Islanders' success in the playoffs. And the Islanders were a team that had their fair share of wins, but they also had their fair share of losses. When Tavares was with the Islanders, they made the playoffs quite a few times, but they lost in the first round quite a few times too. They made the second round only once during Tavares' entire tenure in the island, and they lost embarrassingly 4-1 to the Tampa Bay Lightning. That was in 2016. So you could understand the frustration when the Islanders get themselves a brand new hot rookie in Matthew Barzal. This guy looks like the next generation of New York Islanders offense after dazzling with crazy good performances over a point per game season. He gets 80 points in his first year in the NHL. That's crazy. And you just added this guy to a team that already had John Tavares. They had Anders Lee, who was really good. They got Josh Bailey, who was also getting points as well. And all of a sudden, the Islanders looked towards becoming so much better than we knew them to be before. But then Tavares left. And the whole snake thing, talking about how he's a snake, came out. The Dear John video came out, which was also very noteworthy. And Islanders fans were really salty that Tavares took his talents elsewhere. And if you take a look at the quotes, you can kind of understand why. Here's the article all the way back when Tavares did indeed sign with the Toronto Maple Leafs. I believe this team has got such a great opportunity, and not just for the first few years of my contract. He signed a 7-year contract, by the way. For me, what was important was all 7 years, to really believe that there was a big window here to win and be a part of something special. And to be here, you start to get those emotions coming. It just felt right. From the meeting we had to my feelings over the days and then Saturday, just really feeling right, and it was what I wanted to do. So John Tavares goes back home because they've got a young team. They've got a team that's loaded with young stars that look like they can take over the league just one day at a time. Auston Matthews, Mitch Marner, William Nylander. The big 3 up there in front, leading Toronto offense, and all of a sudden you added John Tavares, a guy who can consistently get upwards of 70 to 80 points in a year, certainly not a bad addition. Meanwhile, that New York Islanders team, man, this team just got beat down. Say what you want about the new additions they got. Say what you want about Anders Lee becoming the new captain. They just lost a franchise talent in John Tavares. How are they going to be able to recuperate? Well, it didn't take long. Because that new hot young guy from last season, Matthew Barzal, even though in his second year he didn't get as many points, even though he wasn't playing with John Tavares, he still was pretty good. And in fact, the rest of the Islanders squad was also pretty good as well. In fact, they made the playoffs, and they actually did something that they only did once before with Tavares in the lineup. They made the second round. They actually swept the Pittsburgh Penguins in the first round, and that was seen as a big, big win for New York. They got swept themselves in the second round to the Carolina Hurricanes, but regardless, they still were a very successful team on paper. John Tavares, on the other hand, well, his Toronto Maple Leafs, yeah, they kind of lost in the first round. They got defeated by the Boston Bruins. Was not a great look. The Leafs were in a position where they already lost to Boston the year before acquiring Tavares, and then they lost to Boston the next year after acquiring Tavares. And it really wasn't great because Toronto had a storied history of losing before John, and then after getting John, they just got themselves another year where they lose in a Game 7, where they perform extraordinarily poorly in a Game 7. Doesn't look like John Tavares' goals of having a win immediately in the short-term future were going to come true that soon. So, we wait a year. We wait until next year. We wait until 2019-20, where the pandemic ultimately hits, where the Toronto Maple Leafs qualify for the play-in series, as do the old New York Islanders squad that John Tavares was a part of before, and we see how things go off in the bubble. Well, spoiler alert, we all know how things go on in the bubble. The Leafs, they lose. Embarrassing loss to the Blue Jackets. Sure, they had that one incredible win, the comeback, 3-0 down, win it in overtime. We get that. They did that. Tavares was a part of that. But the Toronto Maple Leafs ultimately lost in 5 games. They got shut out 3-0 in Game 5. Say what you want about how good Korpisalo is, the Toronto Maple Leafs had a forward core that consisted of 3 $10+ million players, and they completely were hung out to dry in Game number 5 because Korpisalo somewhat stood on his head. Sure, the players tried, but at the end of the day, they did not produce. It's another failure in the Toronto Maple Leafs Auston Matthews era. Instead of getting eliminated in the first round, though, they end up not making the official playoffs in general. The play-in series doesn't even count. This is the qualifiers for the playoffs. But the Islanders, man. Oh man, those Islanders, though. They play a Florida Panthers team that has one of the most highly paid goalies in the entire league, that has an offense that knows how to score goals. Guys like Hoffman, Huberdeau, Dadonov, and Barkov. This team knows how to score goals. And the Islanders shut them down. It's a 2-0 series lead. The Florida Panthers win a game, but then the Islanders take it in game number 4, 3-1. Hey, they're in the final 16. Let's see what they do next. They face off against Alex Ovechkin and the Capitals, and they absolutely stomp. It's a 3-0 lead for the Islanders. The Capitals win game number 4. Ovi gets 2 goals. Awesome story right there, right? But then the Islanders close out game number 5 in what was one of the most boring games we have seen in any of these playoffs, but they get the job done. For the second year in a row, the Islanders are in the second round, and they did that without John Tavares. With Tavares, they only made the second round once in 9 seasons. This time, it's 2 straight without him. And many Islanders fans would say things like, John Tavares leaving was a blessing in disguise, because ultimately, this guy would have cost so much money, it would have prohibited the cap space so much that we wouldn't have been able to make other acquisitions, like acquiring Jean-Gabriel Pageau, or signing Varlamov and Eberle and Brassard to extensions and contracts. And with the Islanders still having $3 million of cap space this season, and a projected $8 million of cap space next season, with the only really important guys to sign being Matt Martin, Brassard, Matthew Barzal, who is going to get a paycheck, we know that, Andy Green, Pollock, and Devon Taves, with other contracts that you have that are expendable, there's a lot more freedom in New York than there is in Toronto when taking a look at their salary cap situation. Their overall projection towards being a team that is flat up against the cap that also cannot win themselves any form of playoff success. So when we talk about irony, in the short term at least, because Tavares does have a 7-year contract, and I have to choose my words very carefully here, it really does not seem like John Tavares signing in Toronto had the big, okay, this is the push over the hump that'll get us into the second round and beyond kind of output that Toronto Maple Leafs fans thought. And on the contrary, Islanders fans, you guys kind of got better without John Tavares in the lineup. Seriously, Barry Trotz has done wonders with this team. So that's our video here today on the ironic situation between the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Islanders, and John Tavares. I hope you enjoyed this video. 99, and bye.